It's one thing to be like a hero born into greatness versus a villain who has struggled, right? And when we think about the people we work with, they're often the bad ones, right? In the family system that are coming in to get fixed, right? What is that if not a villain in their family system? So I started realizing that, superheroes are awesome and they're super popular and there's a lot of things you can do with them as well. But for my clients, they were more identifying with the villains, the bad guys, the unwanted ones, the troubled ones.
Hello, and welcome back to You Need a Counselor podcast. My name is Dr. Julie Johnson. I am the president and founder here at Heart and Solutions, Mental Health and Behavioral Health Counseling in Iowa. So if you are looking for in-office, in-school, or telehealth, mental health counseling, or behavioral health counseling, give us a call today to get started.
And I'm Chrissa Hunt. I am the Vice President at Heart and Solutions in charge of our BHIS department. So BHIS stands for Behavioral Health Intervention Services. And that is our program where we go in home and work with children ages 4 until 19 on different behavioral skills. And we involve the parents as well and can see them at home, school, office, or telehealth right now as well. And this is our podcast, You Need a Counselor. So we are designed for people curious about counseling, but have barriers keeping them from experiencing the benefits of counseling. Our mission is to share stories about counseling, good, bad, and indifferent, and spread the message that everyone can benefit from mental health and behavioral health counseling services.
So our guest today is Maria LaquerreDiego. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist in New Mexico. And she works with clients of all ages. And when we tell you about her specialty, you might think kids, you might think children, but this specialty applies to all ages, and I think excites and ignites the imaginations and the minds of adults and children alike. So welcome, Maria. Thank you for being here.
I'm so glad to be back. Thank you.
So Maria is a mental health therapist and a marriage and family therapist, but you guys remember her first interview. She is our Star Wars girl. She is our fantasy girl. Marvel movies, Star Wars, comic books, anime, Disney, right? She is all things fandom. is Maria's real passion in the work that she's doing with all ages, and the ways that we can use our fandoms, the things that we are excited about, the things that really express who we are, and that we watch a show or we watch a series or a movie and we go, oh, that's a place I want to be, right? That's a person I want to be like. That is something that feels sometimes more real to us than our day-to-day lives that we are living. And so Maria is able to take those passions of ours as clients, and be able to use them for our benefit, for our mental health, and our behavioral health. So we're very, very excited to talk to Maria and to welcome Maria back to the show. And today we're going to talk about villains. So Maria, what is so exciting about villains? Why do we love villains so much?
Man. Yeah. So, I mean, I think I've always liked the bad guys, but I think this really kind of came to fruition in terms of using it in my work. More so during the pandemic, right? So like the pandemic happened, everything had to like kind of shut down and stay home. A lot of people like then turned and like we increased like our Netflix and Disney use, like, right? Like we were binging more shows. Marvel started to roll out their TV series, right? Loki was one of them that was just super popular. And Loki's a bad guy. And so in watching that show with my husband, I was just like, oh, wait, pause that. I gotta write that down. Okay, pause that. I gotta write that down. And he's like, what are you doing? And I was like, this makes so much sense for so many of the people that I work with, right? And he was like, I don't understand. And he's like, you just like the bad guys. And I was like, well, yes, and there's a reason for that, right? So bad guys are often enticing and interesting. One, because they've got cool backstories, right? Like it's one thing to be like a hero born into greatness versus a villain who has struggled, right? And when we think about the people we work with, they're often the bad ones, right? In the family system that are coming in to get fixed, right? What is that if not a villain in their family system? So I started realizing that, superheroes are awesome and they're super popular and there's a lot of things you can do with them as well. But for my clients, they were more identifying with the villains, the bad guys, the unwanted ones, the troubled ones. And so I just started to really kind of embrace that and go, okay, well, let's look at villains. Why are we excited about the bad guys? And I came up with several points that I was like, oh yeah, my client would like that. That's why this one likes this. This one likes this one for this reason. But they're flawed, right? They're not perfect beings, right? Whereas like superheroes are kind of perceived as like they might have a bad day, but for in general use, like they're the good guys. Everything ends up in their favor, and villains don't. Right? The villains hardly ever win. And when they do, it's like downplayed and short-lived. They're also, they're larger than life, right? So there's something about villains who, depending on who we think about in terms of villain, but they often have like vast resources, right? They usually have a group of people that support them and help them carry out their villainous missions. They generally have money and easy access to resources. Again, things my clients don't often have, but would like to have. They also get their needs met, right? So like if we think about Joker and Batman, right? Like Joker's whole mission is to like take down Batman. But he's able to like pull on other people and pull on his resources. We never see, Joker going grocery shopping or like doing his laundry, right? Like those needs are already met for him. So he can spend all of his time and energy focused on his goal. How many of our clients would love to have their needs met, right? And just don't have the resources or the support to have that. They also, I'm not going to say all villains, but most villains have a trauma background, right? The reason that they're behaving the way that they are is because of something that has happened to them. So it's maladaptive coping, check. It's not understanding how to process what's happened to them, and so they continue to repeat patterns, check, right? Like these are things that our clients are experiencing too. And so it's just for me, once I kind of looked at it that way, I was like, of course we like villains. They're much more relatable to us than being a superhero, right? So there's a lot of that, and I'm all things nerdy. But one of the villains that came out, a couple years ago in the Marvel world was Thanos, right? Like the big bad for the first part of the Marvel series. If we look at his goal, his goal was he came from the future and he knew that Earth was we were destroying all of our resources and we had too many people. Our population was too high. Our resources were low. We were going to end, right? He saw that in the future. So he comes to help save us by removing half of the population. Okay, great goal, terrible way to do it, right? But his goal was not malicious. It wasn't an evil plan to wipe out half the earth just for funsies. It was, if we don't do this, if things don't change, Earth will not exist. So here is the way that I have figured out how to save Earth. Why aren't you thankful, right? So a lot of them have well-intended goals. They're just maladaptive coping. They don't have the skills. And so they make poor choices. But usually the intention isn't malicious. And again, like if you work with kids in juvenile justice or adults in, in the adult justice system, some of them are like, I didn't have much of a choice. I had this need, and this was the only option I could see for it. Right. So yeah, and again, like we talked about with Star Wars, this is just a nice way for clients to kind of get some normalization, some assurance of like, oh, I see you. I get that. I get you're not trying to be the bad one. I see that. And let's work on some skills so that you can get those needs met in a different way. Right. But yeah, there's just, so when I say villains, right, like my mind goes to like Star Wars and Marvel. But when it's villains, like when I was like, hey, let's talk about villains, what villains did you guys think of? What came to mind?
For me, it was Cruella de
Yeah,
Vil. She is an Ursula. Like those are, in my mind, growing up, like those were the villains. And Jafar, like
Scar from Lion King.
Scar. Yes. I mean, gosh, like they were the ones, because they were the ones that they were scary. And then I remember Beauty and the Beast coming out and the villain looking totally different than the other villains that we had seen, and how I remember as a child thinking like, oh, that's weird because that doesn't look like a villain.
Right. It wasn't the Beast.
It wasn't the Beast. It was what's his name? Gaston.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking that because as a child who grew up on Disney, I thought stepmother meant a mean mom. Right? And so I remember a friend telling me in kindergarten, or maybe it was even before kindergarten, saying, oh, that's my stepmom. And I was like, oh no. And I was so scared for her because in my mind, stepmother meant mean mother.
Right.
I had no idea what that meant because so many villains in Disney movies are stepmothers. Right. You've got Snow White's stepmother, you've got Cinderella's stepmother. They and the way that they are labeled is stepmother, evil stepmother, wicked stepmother. And so that was the association that I had as a child. Cruella de Vil is one that used to really scare me. And actually I think out of all of them, she was the one that scared me the most. She didn't look cartoony. A lot of the other villains looked kind of cartoony and silly. She didn't. She looked like a businesswoman. Like she, you know what I mean? Like a person in our actual life who has actual power over our lives or over our family's lives.
Sure.
So she scared me. And it's funny because she also scared my daughter. My daughter's 6. And she scared my daughter also. And so, right or wrong, I said, well, I'm going to show her the Cruella movie. Which
scare her even more.
Which I thought, I was like, this might scare her even more. But it honestly didn't. She actually loves that movie. And it really did help her to understand, because I think that sometimes the fear, I think the reason that she also scared me the most was because the other villains, I could kind of see where they were coming from a little bit, right? So I'm a child who grew up to be a counselor. So I'm looking for, right, motivation. Like, why are they doing what's happening? And so with Snow White's wicked stepmother, I can see that, okay, well, there was a power dynamic there, right? She was a threat to that queen. She was the queen now, but that person was the heir. And so kind of like Scar in Lion King. I can see where that makes sense a little bit. Okay. Cruella and the puppies made no sense to me. It was
just evil for being evil.
It was evil for the fact of being evil. And that scared me, I think, the most. Gaston, I was like, okay, well, he has like a pride thing, like he's fighting against his pride. His pride is making him do these things. He needs the most beautiful wife. He needs this and that, right? And so I could still kind of see where they were coming from a little bit. Cruella scared me so bad because I was like, I don't understand you. And when that movie came out, it's not perfect. It doesn't perfectly. I was like, that doesn't really make sense. But it helped me to kind of process out that fear that I had of like that unknown, of like the randomness of evil. And I believe that it helped my daughter as well to kind of go, okay, because now when we watch 101 Dalmatians, she doesn't have that same reaction.
Yeah, it's different.
It's different.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Movies like Cruella, Maleficent, when it came out, shows like Loki, they humanize these villains, right? And as therapists, as helpers and healers, like that's our job, right? We like peek behind the curtain and go, why are you doing what you're doing? Let's find a healthier way to do that for you. But I think these movies, this shift is the first time like it's the general public is also going like, oh, why are they doing those things? Oh, that I can see now why she's doing what she's doing, right? It gives them that humanization, that reasoning behind it. Yeah. What about for you, Chrissa? What villains came up for you?
I mean, I think the same ones. I don't really watch Marvel movies. Yeah, Disney's like where my brain instantly went to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we can, I mean, and yeah, all things nerdy, but I mean, even shows like Dexter, right? Like that show, I mean, the main character is both the hero and the villain, depending on how you're looking at that, the story at the time. But you could pick anybody, right? Like all movies have a villain, right? And that's the other thing that's interesting about villains is like without them, there is no story, right? Without a villain, without a counterpart, what would be the story? When you're saving nobody from nobody, right? Like what are we doing with our lives? And so they're what causes the interest for me, right? It's like, the heroes are always going to win, fine. But what are they battling, and how smart is that villain, and how hard are they working, and like why are they doing what they're doing, right? So even if we stick in the world of Disney, right? So like Jafar and Hades, they had a purpose. They weren't always just evil for the sake of being evil. But yeah, I think it's really interesting. And so in working with my clients, it helps them feel like, well, you can be flawed and you can still learn to make different choices, right? The other really cool thing about villains that we don't see with like heroes is the redemption arc, right? So someone who at some point in their story gets to make a different choice and changes the path that they're on. What is that if not coming to therapy? Yeah. Right? Like, some examples are like the Winter Soldier, Darth Vader, but even like Harry Potter, right? Severus Snape, right? In the beginning, he is portrayed as a bad guy, right? Like doesn't like Harry Potter. He's mean to him. He's picking on him. But if you read or watch the story all the way through, and you get that glimpse of why are you behaving this way, he's able to then like show that wasn't all for naught, and he's able to then make a different choice and help instead of being a barrier So like, examples like that are really cool to show people, because even if you're 40 and labeled as the bad guy, you can make a choice to choose a different path. And sometimes our clients don't even know that they have that option, right? Mm-hmm. If they were the bad kid and then the bad teenager, and now they're just like that difficult adult, they may not know that they can choose to do something different, that they don't have to take that label and live with it. So using like redemption arcs can be really fun. Be like, well, Bucky Barnes was a good guy turned bad guy turned Avenger. If he could do that, you too could like choose to do things differently. It's never too late.
Yeah, I love that. Harry Potter is such a great example, because each of the bad guys and each of the good guys, they're all intertwined. I mean, they are like, it's hard to actually objectively look at it and see a good guy.
Oh yeah,
Harry Potter.
Absolutely.
It's a little bit challenging, because, and I think that's what makes it so real and feel so real, is that when you've got a series that is that long, you get into very nitty-gritty details about each person. And so the more that you know a person, just like the more that we know and understand ourselves, the more that we can see that nuance of like, oh, in this situation though, like I can't really back Harry Potter here.
100%.
Right? Like he's not like the best person always, right? And so because he's real, like we're all that way. And so just like in real life, we can't always, like, I might love my partner, but my partner is not always right. They're not always good intention. They're not always, and same thing for ourselves. Like we're not always that way, nobody's perfect because everybody's perfect, right? That because we are all built that way, and we're all human. We have those pieces. I just watched Monsters Inc. or Monsters University the other day. Oh my gosh, was that great for also flipping the script and understanding each of the characters. In the first movie, well, first of all, just the premise of Monsters Inc. totally flips the script, right? These monsters are the heroes. They're the ones we are, and the humans are the bad guys, the scary ones. Finding Nemo and Finding Dory. The humans are doing very normal, fishing or things that as humans we're like, well, that's not evil. And then from the perspective that we're shown, the humans are the villains in those stories. And Monsters Inc. or Monsters University was so interesting to me because our heroes, Mike and Sully in the first movie, they're not so nice. They're not so great. Like Sully is that big teddy bear character and he's the hero and he's so great. And then we see them in college and we're like, oh, they're not perfect people. And they were going through those challenges too. And that one, I don't remember his name.
Randall.
Oh my gosh, is he cute? And that's in Monsters University, right? You feel so bad for him. You go, oh yeah, like I wondered why he didn't like them. Like
I know.
you can kind of get it. And that was also one that I sometimes when I watch Disney movies, and not as much recently, but at the time that Monsters Inc. came out, when I would watch a Disney movie, I would get kind of cynical about it because it wasn't real. I hate endings that are not real. There was a movie, what was it? The one where he has to have adrenaline all the time or he dies, and he and he falls off the edge of a building at the end of the movie, and then it just goes to black. And I was like, yes, that movie is real. Like he died. Of course he did. In that situation, you would die. And then they came out with a sequel, and I was so mad, but because he didn't die. But but Monsters University, they broke the rules. They cheated in the I almost said Triwizard Cup. No, they
Monster
cheated in
games.
the Monster Games. And it wasn't that happy ending because we knew what the ending was. We knew that they were scarers by the second movie, right? So I was thinking, oh my gosh, they're going to somehow get out of this, right? Somebody's going to swoop in and save them. And then they didn't. They got suspended and they went and worked in the mailroom, and then they worked their way up. And I thought, oh my gosh, that is gorgeous. That is beautiful. For being real, how things really are in the real world.
Absolutely. Yeah. And our clients feel that too, right? Like there is, especially the ones that come in because they're the problem, right? If they can't see a happy ending for themselves, right? So often our clients are like, well, if I wasn't here or if I wasn't in the family system, like they would be fine. It's me. And they can't picture for themselves a better outcome. And so stories like that are really, really helpful to be like, not everyone who looks perfect on the outside is perfect, right? Like, especially with like the social media aspect of life these days, right? What you see isn't always the full story. And with these new generation, like, with the millennials that work at Disney and Pixar now, all the new movies are like therapy movies. But we're able to see that the villains aren't who we expect them to be, right? And we could have a whole another hour conversation on Encanto and who's the bad guy in Encanto, right? Because Bruno is named the bad guy, but I would argue that it's Abuela, right? Like, no, I think Abuela is the one that needs to like go to therapy. She needs a counselor, right? But and I think that's helpful too, because often our clients don't feel like they're the problem, that they are a bad person, but that is the message that they've been given for so long, right? So in having them come in, and if they're into villains, and we start this kind of conversation in our work together, some of the things I like to ask them is like, if Jafar were in here on my couch instead of you today, do you think he would talk about himself like you do? And they're like, well, no, I don't think so, right? Like Jafar doesn't feel bad about his choices or, any of that. And, or like, it looks like Dexter has kind of lost control of the situation in this episode. Is there a situation that you wish you had more control over? Right? I mean, Dexter's methods of dealing with stress are probably not the healthiest, and that's not what I'm encouraging you to do. But if we had Dexter in the room, what would you tell him? Like what would you say in terms of like, how could we do things differently? How could we set boundaries for yourself? Severus Snape, right? Like how would we be able to support you in making better choices to meet those needs, Thanos, right? Instead of killing half the population, are there other solutions? And it feels fun and it feels kind of campy, but what we're doing is we're helping our clients problem solve externally, right? It's that whole narrative piece of like, it's not you. Let's look at another person who has similar issues, and how would they be able to make better choices? What other choices could they have come up with? And then we refer that back to them. What are some other choices that maybe looking back, you wish you had thought about then? And how can we use that in the future when you have to make another difficult choice? How do we help you make sure you look at all your options? Mm-hmm. So I think it's really cool, and it's really important for them to feel seen and heard and validated that they're not a bad person. They're just meeting their needs in ways that are affecting others negatively, right? And that can change. We can change our behaviors. We can learn different coping skills. They're not a bad person. They just don't have the skills to make different choices more often than not.
Yeah. And sometimes even the choices that they're making are the right choices. They're just hard choices. And they're choices that other people don't agree with, that maybe the hero doesn't agree with because they don't understand the circumstance.
Right.
So when Severus Snape was presented as a bad guy, and then it was like, oh no, wait, he's a good guy. Like, everybody trusts him and all of that. And then people find out like, oh, he killed Dumbledore. And then people are like, I knew it. I knew he was a bad guy. I knew it. Look what he did. Right. And something like that. And then we understand what happened and why he did that. Those kinds of things, I think sometimes are, yeah, he made the right choices. Those were hard choices. Those were really, really hard choices. They weren't things that he wanted to do, but they were things that he had to do. They were the right choices. They just weren't understood by the kids at this school. And why should they be? these are 12-year-old children at this school questioning a teacher's decisions. Which, yes, if a teacher is doing something wrong, we should question their decisions.
Yes, yes. There shouldn't be killing administrators in school.
Exactly, exactly. Yes.
Yes.
But at the same time, as humans, we make hard decisions. And as you talked about, sometimes that decision is to get our needs met, to get our basic needs met. And we have to make those decisions. And it is the right decision. If it is the survival of my child, or somebody else has to file an insurance claim on their car, that's what's going to happen, because sometimes those decisions are the decisions that we feel like we have to make.
Yeah,
and whether we have to make those decisions or not, they're not going to be understood on the surface.
No. And I love that. Yeah, because like Snape and also Bruno from Encanto, I think like they take the mantle of being the bad guy to make the right choices, right? Like they were forced to do things that they did not want to do, but were doing them for the betterment of everybody else. And so they just had to kind of like own that, yeah, okay, I'm the bad guy, but if that's going to allow the rest of the family, or the system, the world to be better, then fine. Name me the bad guy, but like then get better, right? So like, so I mean in Encanto, like Bruno left because he felt like it was kind of given to him that he was the problem, that he was making bad things happen. And he knew that wasn't the case, right? Like he wasn't making things happen. He could just kind of see the future. But he was like, fine, if this is what's better for the family, call me the bad guy and I will lead. But then get better. And then that didn't happen. So it forced the family system to go, oh, maybe he wasn't a bad guy. Maybe there were other things kind of contributing to that. And like family therapy, like that's our goal, right? We want to understand our client and then help the family understand why these behaviors are happening. Because we can help one person, but if we put them right back in their family system and nothing else has changed, how long is that change going to stick, right? Whereas we can like, okay, I understand why you're doing this. Now let's pull the whole system together and go, okay, this is my understanding of why these behaviors are happening. Let's look at what other options there are and how is the whole family responding to this? Because generally one person is the scapegoat for a systems problem, right? And if the systems problem doesn't get fixed, then Bruno left his family, lived in the house still, but like you left the family, it didn't get better. I didn't fix the problem, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a lovely example to help show parents too, of like, you say you need me to fix your kid. It's never just one person. It is the system in which they are living and kind of growing up in. So yes, I want to understand your kid, but the problem is going to be a systems thing, and it's going to take everybody to like fix that. And so like go watch Encanto and then come back to me and let's talk again. But it's nice to have, it's nice to have those references, because we're watching the same movies, right? Like I watched all the Disney movies with my kids like a million times at this point. Sometimes because I request them, and most of the time because they want to watch them. So it's a common language, just like when we talked about Star Wars, for people in that fandom, it's a language that if I'm like, we could talk about being dark side, light side, Sith, and Jedi, they get it, right? So if I can go to parents and go, you've seen Encanto, right? Yeah, a million times. Okay, cool. I'm going to ask you to watch it again, but I want you to look at it in this way, right? I want you to look at the story from this person's perspective. And then when you come back, I want to talk about that and see what maybe you feel differently about, and being able to say, like, was Bruno a bad guy? Bruno wasn't a bad guy. How did things get fixed? The family had to come together. They all had to be honest, right? Like they all had to be honest about what was happening. And then they had to come back together in order for the problem to be fixed. That's what we do in therapy. Right. And so, and it's just easier to do that than, no parent wants to sit there and hear, oh, you're the problem. It's not your kid, it's you, right? It's hard enough to get parents in for family therapy sometimes. But if you do that, like, they're not coming. But, if we can have a kinder common language of like, this kind of makes me think of like Encanto, and like we can talk about it that way. It's that externalization. It's a much safer conversation for everyone to be a part of.
Yeah, Encanto and Frozen.
I was thinking
Both,
Frozen too.
Yeah, both movies where the villain is actually trauma. And actually Moana, same thing. The villain is trauma. And it doesn't have a character in name or visualization, but in both movies that villain is trauma. So we go through, and at first it's like, oh well, Maribel doesn't have the gift and she's kind of doing things like she's kind of poking her nose into things, right? And so I could imagine her coming into being presented for therapy or for BHIS, behavioral health intervention, and being brought in for this because, well, Isabella doesn't need it and Rowisa doesn't need it, right? They are helpful. They are perfect. They do everything they're asked. They don't need behavioral health intervention. They don't need therapy. But Maribel is always asking questions and she's always doing these things and she doesn't have a gift. And so I could see her being presented as, okay, we need to talk about this. And then as Bruno comes up, the other villain in Encanto is the fear of change, and the fear of the future, which again is in that situation is a trauma response.
Absolutely.
So the song, I don't know what it's called in Spanish, but that translation is Two Caterpillars, the one about the war, and the one where you see Abuela and Abuelo and
flashback. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, then we see what that trauma was. And we see it kind of woven throughout the movie. And then we see where fear of change makes total sense. Fear of change, it feels like a natural progression, and it is something that we can work on. It is something that we can actively recognize and say, okay, had this traumatic experience, I now fear any kind of change, and my son is telling me these things are going to change in my life, and I don't like that. Right?
Absolutely.
Like, stop doing that. You're making change happen. And I don't want change. I don't like change because change means losing people. Change means losing the people and the places and the things that I love. And it, so when we see that, and then we see all these pieces, it does feel like family therapy, that movie. It is amazing. And it also, you know, I think it does do a good job of showing reconciliation at the end, and also showing each family member letting the love for each other overcome all of those challenges. So
Yeah. No, I love that. I do. I think, you know, the villain in that story is generational trauma, right? It happened to Abuela, right? And then we look at her daughters, right? And Peppa, who when her emotions get the best of her, you know, all the weather changes and stuff, right? So she wasn't able to, like, she would never learn how to manage those. And it manifests now so that everybody can see her emotions.
she's just like
right?
Elsa. She's just like
Absolutely.
Elsa. She was
Just like
not
Elsa.
allowed to, don't let it snow, don't let it out.
Right. Get it under control, right?
Contain
Like,
it.
I think there was even a part in there, she was just like, there's a thundercloud. And she's like, what am I supposed to do?
She walks around going, clear skies, clear skies, clear skies. Right? She doesn't let it, she doesn't
Right.
let herself, and other people don't let her express. how
Right.
she
And then we
feels.
look at Maribel's mom, right? And she's a healer, but she's very quiet. She's very almost kind of mousy in the way that she, like, kind of moves through the family system. Bruno's not talked about, right? And then we look at the next generation, Maribel and her sisters, right? Isabella's perfect, nothing's ever wrong. Luisa's strong, she has no weakness, right? That's just generational trauma being passed down and manifesting in different ways. Yeah, I mean, we could have a whole nother hour just on Encanto, but and I would say, like, most villains, most bad guys of the story is trauma, right? So, you know, we could go back to my boy Anakin, who becomes Darth Vader. Even he gets a redemption arc and does good at the end, but, like, that was trauma. The choices that he made, the reason he developed into Darth Vader was trauma and fear, right? Like, we could pick almost anyone, but I love being able to tell that to people. It's like, you're not the bad guy. Trauma's the bad guy. Let's pull that out and let's look at that, because that is why you're behaving the way that you're behaving. And we can change your behaviors, but it's not you. The bad guy is trauma, right? Um, you know, same with Dexter. We can go back to Dexter. Trauma, early trauma, right? And he even, like, in the show is like, this is why I'm doing the things I'm doing. Like, you know, it's just this constant point of reference for him. You know, I'd love to have Dexter in for a couple of therapy sessions. Let's talk about trauma, right?
Yeah, and Dexter's a great example of, so Dexter's father, Harry, he tried to do what we in counseling try to help people do, sublimate those tendencies or sublimate those ways of coping into more productive ways of coping, right? Ways that are going to help us, that are not going to cause more problems for us. And so Dexter's impulse to kill people was going to cause a lot of problems for him. And so his father, Harry, tried to do what, similar to what we do in counseling, he tried to help Dexter sublimate that impulse into something that maybe wasn't going to cause as many problems for him, which is targeting bad guys, targeting criminals. But so many times, how the way that he did that was challenging, right? Because another way that Dexter was able to sublimate that impulse and that trauma response was he became a blood technician.
Right.
And that was a very healthy and productive way to sublimate that trauma response and that impulse. Extremely healthy way. And then we see this other way that his father tried to teach him how to do. And the thing is that we do learn some things about his father later in the episodes, but we can see that he was trying to do some sublimation with his child, and he did the best way that he knew how. He was a police officer. He knew these things, so he did the best that he could because he had trauma that caused him to want to be in law enforcement and caused him to want to catch bad guys. And so he took his own trauma response and said, well, this is how I'm coping with that. I'm going to sublimate my son's impulses into the way that I have been coping, right? Which also was causing Harry problems, but he didn't realize they were causing him problems. And so he passed that right on to his son with the best of intentions, thinking, okay, I can use the same coping that helped me, the same sublimation that has helped me. I can give that to my son and teach him how to do that, teach him how to be a killer without getting caught, and also teach him how to get bad guys at the same time. And so I just think it's Dexter is a really great example of sublimation because
absolutely.
A lot of the things that he does also, and that Deb does as a result of Harry's death are actually really healthy. They do a lot of things that aren't healthy. But a lot of those things are really pretty healthy ways of coping with that, right? Their bond as brother and sister, much, much stronger after Harry's death. Because when he was alive, they were always fighting for attention with him, right? Much stronger after his death. And that was a healthy way of coping with that loss. They're both obsessed with exercise and working out, right? And Deb's always running on the treadmill when she stressed out. That's a great way to supplement, right, those impulses and those urges and that trauma and those feelings. And so I think that Dexter actually does a really great job of showing some of those different ways that the sublimation gets implemented, the ways that it goes wrong because Harry tries to supplement his own. I think it does a really great job with that.
It even has the generational piece, right? So if you've done the last newest Dexter piece, right? Spoilers for anyone who hasn't, stop now. His son, right? So Dex, when his son returns to him as a teenager, Dexter was even, going like, oh my God, is he just like me? And then we get to witness, is he going to follow that generational trauma curse? Or is he going to break it and do different? Which is, again, was just like, oh my gosh, so good. And it's what our clients often are faced with. Do you stick with the family rule, or do you break out of that and be different? And that's not always accepted, and it's often labeled the bad guy.
Along with that, with his son and with his two stepchildren in the original series, Dexter does a lot of projecting onto those kids. He projects his own stuff, right? Harrison will take a knife and or hold something a certain way, and Dexter will go, what is that? And so he does a lot of projecting even onto his stepchildren in the first seasons, where he knows how he feels. He knows the shame and the challenges that he's having in his life, and we see a lot of the projection of that onto his children in the first series. I haven't watched the second one, but we see a lot of that, and I always think that is really interesting as well, because in family systems, as parents and caregivers, there's a lot of that happens. And we see things in our children and we go, oh no, they're going to have this same challenge, right? I figured out how to fix that. I'm going to implement that right. And they're not us. So the things that work for us are not necessarily going to work for them. And then we get frustrated because we go, you should be able to figure this out because I figured it out. Well, I figured it out and I'm 38. Like they haven't figured it out because they're 5. Right.
Right. Yeah.
There's a lot of that projection that we see when we watch Dexter act as a parent and a caregiver, that I think is so interesting. And again, fear. So the only times we really see Dexter show fear are what, like, he'll have John Lithgow after him, he'll have whatever. He only shows fear when it involves the kids. And that always really was interesting to me, because
His family. Yeah.
his family, right? And that's where he would mess up, is when he had that fear, because it had to, the kids and Deb, and when it had to do with his family. And I think there's a lot to that, because when it comes to our family, that's where we have fear because we care so much. And that fear can override that caring, and then we love that we have for them, because it can feel so intertwined. It can feel like, well, I'm doing this thing, I'm actually doing it out of fear, but it feels like I'm doing it out of love, because I have the fear because I love you so much.
Right.
It's so intertwined. And I think Dexter's such a great example of that.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm hoping that you guys kind of see why villains are so interesting, and how it could be useful for clients in therapy. I know when I first was like, let's talk about villains in therapy, everyone's like, oh, Maria, what are you doing now? But I think there's a lot to it. And in my work with my clients, kids, teens, and adults, it's like this makes sense to them. This they understand. We can talk about this, and it doesn't have to be talking about them directly for us to get there in therapy. So I'm hoping that this has been helpful, and I come off a little less wackadoodle for my love for all things villain. But yeah, I think it's just, having counselors and therapists be open to, if your clients like villains, if they identify as a villain, like as their interest, or who their like superhero person is. One, that's not diagnosable. Just liking villains is not a diagnosis. Two, mental health is not causation for violence, right? Like, that's another disclaimer I want to put out there. There was a lot of upheaval when Joker came out, the Joaquin Phoenix movie, right? Mental illness does not give rights for violence, right? We can all agree to that. But when, if you're not in the villain world like I am, and your client is like, oh, I really identify with Joker or Vader or Snape, I don't want them to go, oh my God, you're gonna like go do bad things, and like you're gonna hurt people. It's not that. I would encourage people to be curious about what it is about that character that draws their client in. Is it a flaw that they identify with? Is it the power that person has that they wish that they had in their life? But just be curious and then have fun with it. The work we do is hard enough. Any chance I can make it nerdy and fun, we're going to do that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us again. This was wonderful as always. Just a really, really enjoyable topic, and a really great way to bring that understanding into that counseling session. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Absolutely. I am Maria LaquerreDiego, and I need a counselor.
Awesome. Me too. So does Chrissa. We appreciate you being here. And thank you so much for this information. Very, very cool.
Thank you for listening to the You Need a Counselor podcast. We are so grateful that you are here. Now, we want to hear from you. Text us or give us a call at 515-650-3231. You can also find the You Need a Counselor podcast on Facebook and Instagram. If you've enjoyed today's show, please take a moment to like, review, and comment, as all of these things help others to find and benefit from this podcast as well. If you're in the state of Iowa and interested in mental health counseling or behavioral health intervention services, give us a call at 1-800-531-4236. And if you're a provider seeking play therapy CEUs, you can find us at patreon.com/youneedatraining. We'll see you for the next episode, Sunday at 5.